Some spiritual techniques called band were built to make the false self hard to protect. One early Shaiva ascetic current deliberately courted ridicule. Other restricted paths hid virtue, crossed purity boundaries, treated renunciation as social death, generated sacred identity, or withheld advanced teachings until initiation. I'm giving you 7 of these pressure systems, the exact support each one attacks, and the trap that appears when secrecy or transgression becomes another spiritual costume. First, clean up the word banned. In this video, it covers 4 different situations: lineage-restricted instruction, hidden practice, socially taboo behavior, and ascetic disciplines built around deliberate disapproval. Those histories differ. Their shared spiritual pressure is simple. Each removes one place where identity takes shelter: reputation, visible goodness, purity, social position, biography, sacred self-image, access to the secret itself. Technique number 1 comes from the old Pashupata Shaiva world. At certain stages, practitioners deliberately entered public situations in ways that drew ridicule, insult, or loss of respect. The surviving source tradition gives its own religious account of that dishonor, including a strange economy of merit and demerit. I want to keep that source claim distinct from the lens we are using today. Under our lens, another pressure becomes obvious. Reputation lives in the body long before a person admits how much he needs it. A man can sit alone for an hour and feel detached from praise because the room contains 0 praise to test him. Then, one person laughs at him and the chest changes. The face heats, the jaw prepares an answer. The mind builds a defense before he has even decided whether an answer has value. That little surge exposes an entire private government. Public honor suddenly becomes physical. A thought inside somebody else's head reaches your body as if skin has been touched. The event may last 3 seconds. The replay can occupy the drive home, dinner, the shower, and the bed. That is the first support of the false self, reflected identity. The body keeps asking the room to confirm the person it has learned to call me. The old ascetic pressure placed the social image where it could get bruised. The deeper lesson becomes useful in ordinary adult life because you already have more sophisticated versions of the same test. Someone corrects you in front of coworkers. Someone younger knows something you missed. Your partner tells a story that makes you look ordinary. A friend gives another person credit for an idea you carried. Your adult child speaks to you like a human being instead of the authority figure you remember being. That sting is evidence. The false self has a social skin. A respectable identity can take 30 years to build, competent at work, dependable in the family, spiritually informed, composed under pressure. Maybe you became the person everybody calls when something goes wrong. Maybe your name carries weight in a room. Maybe hardship forced you to become steady and you earned that steadiness honestly. Then embarrassment arrives and exposes the hidden contract beneath the achievement. People must keep seeing me correctly. That contract is expensive. It turns ordinary misunderstanding into injury. It turns correction into humiliation. It turns somebody else's boredom into a threat to value. It makes the nervous system scan faces for confirmation. It fills the head with imaginary courtrooms where witnesses finally understand what really happened. The spiritual work here keeps conduct and loosens the courtroom. A mature person can feel the social impact, choose a clean response, repair whatever deserves repair, and let the verdict remain unfinished. Freedom from reputation keeps ethics intact while reducing the addiction to being correctly perceived. This also keeps the practice from becoming theater. Deliberately becoming offensive can build a harder identity. Rebel, dangerous mystic, person too free for society. Admiration and disgust can both feed a self that needs an audience. The deeper pressure sits underneath both reactions. Can the image lose value while conduct stays clean? That question belongs in a video about the false self, because spiritual language can hide this layer for decades. A person can speak beautifully about oneness while the body still panics when status drops. He can talk about ego death while arranging every conversation so wisdom remains attached to his name. He can say ultimate reality appears everywhere while needing the room to know he understands that sentence. And watch the body here. Reputation rarely announces itself as philosophy. It shows up as heat behind the face, a tightening around the sternum, a fast explanation, a joke used to recover status, a story told later to a sympathetic person. The social self reaches for a mirror. The first technique removes the mirror long enough for you to see the reaching. The second technique gets quieter. Public ridicule attacks reputation from the outside. The next current starves spiritual reputation from the inside. In early Sufi history, a current later known as the path of blame developed a severe suspicion of visible holiness. The old teachers had watched spiritual practice create another appetite, the appetite to be seen as devout. So piety could be concealed, good works could stay private, inner states could be kept away from public display. The self that wanted credit lost a whole food source. That is technique number 2, concealment of piety. A person can become attached to being seen as disciplined just as easily as he can become attached to pleasure. He can fast and quietly hope somebody notices the restraint. He can pray and enjoy the image of himself as devout. He can study difficult material and turn every conversation into a demonstration of depth. He can become generous while keeping a private accounting book in the chest. I gave. I helped. I stayed calm. I forgave. I understood first. The act may still benefit somebody. Ownership changes what the act writes into identity. If this distinction between reputation and clean conduct is useful, like the video. Now keep building with me. The real test appears when the good act receives zero audience reward. Motivation either keeps its spine or starts looking for a witness. Disappointment can appear. The mind imagines a future scene where somebody finally discovers the hidden goodness. Resentment can rise because the sacrifice remained invisible. That is self-image beginning to glow around virtue. There is something surgical about this. Worldly ego wants credit for success. Spiritual ego wants credit for having risen above the need for worldly success. It can wear simplicity like jewelry. It can turn humility into a performance. It can turn secrecy into an elite badge. The initiated person, the hidden practitioner, the one carrying material kept beyond other people's access. It can even turn self-criticism into rank. The person who believes his honesty with himself proves greater depth. The blade has to cut closer. The act happens. The good is done. The body receives silence. The mind receives zero elevation story. Devotion survives on its own legs. This is where the thumbnail phrase, "Don't tell anyone," becomes useful. One form of secrecy creates power through exclusion. Possession of hidden knowledge becomes rank. A second form removes the audience that turns practice into status. The same closed mouth can serve two completely different identities. One builds an inner circle in the head. The other lets an inner life stay private. You can see the difference in ordinary adult life. Someone helps a family member financially and tells 3 friends about the sacrifice. Someone else supports a stranger quietly, and the story ends there. One person studies an obscure tradition because the material genuinely rearranges his inner life. Another uses the same vocabulary as armor, making every conversation harder to challenge. The outer activity can look almost identical. The inner economy carries a different weight. This gets sharper with age because reputation becomes layered. Career, marriage, family role, spiritual history, mistakes survived, pain endured, things learned the hard way. You carry decades of evidence about who you are, and that history gives identity real density. Then hidden practice presses a harder question: how much of what I call myself still depends on somebody else agreeing? That question belongs in serious spirituality. The false self watches faces, it measures tone, it remembers who respected the story and who looked bored. It stores social response as evidence about value. Concealed piety breaks one of those feedback loops. Prayer can stay real and private. An insight can stay useful and anonymous. Generosity can reach another person while the giver's name disappears from the story. A spiritual experience can stay sacred while rank fades around it. The edge case deserves equal force. Secrecy can become its own superiority game. A person starts enjoying how hidden he is. Open practitioners begin to look shallow. Invisibility becomes romantic. Accountability feels like contamination of the secret. Now the false self has found a darker room. A cleaner test is simple. Hidden spirituality should reduce self-display while increasing honesty, warmth, accountability, and clean action. Secret practice that grows coldness, manipulation, contempt, or hunger to be discovered is feeding the same old claimant. That second technique attacks the holy costume. The third one goes deeper into the body because it attacks the categories of pure and impure that personality uses to organize reality. Certain Kaula and left-hand tantric streams became famous because they placed substances, settings, and acts condemned by orthodox purity systems inside a sacred initiatory frame. The historical forms vary widely, and each lineage carries its own boundaries. For this lesson, the outer ritual can stay behind the curtain. The useful pressure appears earlier. The practitioner meets something the inherited mind has marked contaminating, forbidden, low, or spiritually dangerous, and the reaction exposes the identity built around purity. This is technique number 3, ritualized purity inversion. Purity begins as a useful capacity. You learn which food dulls you, which environment scatters attention, which relationship pattern creates chaos, which habit leaves the body heavy, which behavior weakens trust. Discipline grows from those observations. Good. Then discipline can harden into identity. The person becomes the clean one. The world divides. Certain bodies feel lower. Certain jobs feel dirty. Certain neighborhoods feel beneath him. Certain emotions become embarrassing. Anger gets buried because his spiritual image requires calm. Desire gets hidden because his image requires control. Grief gets polished into wisdom while the chest is still carrying the raw thing. Now purity has become a wall around personality. Transgressive Tantra placed pressure against that wall. Its ritual world was highly specific, initiatory, and embedded in rules, vows, symbolism, and teacher-student structures. Our lens comes after that source fact. We are looking at what taboo can expose in the body. If ultimate reality truly appears as the whole field, disgust becomes spiritually interesting. The stomach recoils, the face changes, the body creates distance, then the mind explains why the reaction proves spiritual truth. Sometimes the reaction protects life, sometimes it protects an image of being uncontaminated. That difference is everything. A clean ethical boundary protects consent, health, responsibility, trust, and other beings. A purity identity protects the feeling of being above contamination. One can stay calm. The other often needs contempt to keep the line bright. This happens fast in ordinary life. A smell changes the face before thought arrives. A social label changes posture before a fact is known. A religious symbol creates warmth in one body and threat in another. A family name, political word, neighborhood, addiction history, divorce, illness, or job title can trigger a whole inherited moral map in a second. The body reports the conditioning first. The intellect arrives later and calls the reaction obvious. That is why purity is such strong false self material. Identity can use aversion as architecture. It says, I stay on this side of the line. It says, that emotion belongs over there. It says, that kind of person sits beneath my category. Every border contributes another brick to the person called me. Tantric purity reversal attacks the brickwork. The mature lesson asks for discrimination held inside order. Every force enters examination. Desire can be felt and held under wisdom. Disgust can be felt and traced back to its source. Shame can be brought into awareness before it becomes secrecy. Anger can be recognized as force before personality turns it into either violence or a fake smile. That is body-based non-duality. The path includes difficult material while order stays alive. And this is exactly where transgression can become ego cocaine. The person crosses a taboo and feels braver than everybody around him. He starts collecting shocking experiences as evidence of realization. Obscurity becomes proof of depth. Danger becomes proof of courage. Social disapproval becomes proof that the path is advanced. The forbidden becomes a costume with better lighting. Now the conservative practitioner and the transgressive practitioner can feed the same claimant from opposite sides. One builds identity through purity, the other builds identity through freedom from purity. Both still need comparison. The deeper break appears when the polarity loses ownership. Discipline can remain useful while rank drains out of it. Taboo can be understood while thrill drains out of it. Desire can move through the body while command stays with the conscious being. Disgust can arise while dignity remains attached to the other person. That is a much harder form of freedom because it produces fewer dramatic stories. A person who once needed everything clean may become capable of sitting beside a family member in addiction, illness, disgrace, or grief while keeping boundaries and human dignity together. A person who once needed a rebellious identity may become capable of following an ordinary rule because the rule genuinely protects people. A person who once used spiritual purity to escape sexuality, anger, money, aging, or family history may finally bring those subjects into the same field of awareness as meditation. That is where the old transgressive intelligence becomes usable for an adult life. The technique attacks purity as an identity support. The next current pushes the same problem into social hierarchy, where disgust stops being private and starts deciding which human beings deserve distance. Aghor gets flattened into shock imagery very easily. Cremation grounds, skulls, death, and radical ascetic associations are genuinely part of its public history. Yet ethnographic work also shows healing, service, and contact with people carrying intense social stigma. That second side gives us the part I care about here. The fourth pressure comes from Aghor's world of non-discrimination. Its target is social pollution as identity. The false self inherits a map long before it writes a philosophy. Clean and dirty, high and low, respectable and shameful, worthy and untouchable, successful life and failed life, sacred body and contaminated body. Those categories enter posture. Eyes linger differently, hands hesitate, the stomach tightens. Distance gets created before the mind admits it has made a judgment. The current pushes directly into that inherited map. Death carries obvious force in the tradition because death collapses social rank with brutal efficiency. Wealth, title, beauty, education, family pride, and reputation all meet the same bodily limit. Yet the sharper test happens among the living. Can dignity survive contact with somebody your social world trained you to avoid? Can service survive disgust? Can spiritual language survive the moment? Suffering smells bad, looks chaotic, interrupts your schedule, or carries a history that threatens your image. That is harder than collecting occult images. A skull can become decor. A cemetery story can become aesthetic. A dark symbol can become another possession. Non-discrimination becomes real when behavior changes in daylight. A person can speak about oneness and still treat a waiter like furniture. He can speak about deathless consciousness and humiliate an aging parent because care has become inconvenient. He can love fierce imagery and still recoil from a neighbor's illness, poverty, addiction history, disability, disgrace, or social class. The body tells the truth faster than the vocabulary. That is where this current becomes practical, while the outer extremes stay in their proper context. The false self loves spiritual problems that live far away. Secret cave, ancient graveyard, forbidden symbol, strange initiation. Those things can feel intense, while ordinary contempt survives perfectly well at home. A serious path carries the pressure back into relationship. The polluted object becomes the emotion you cut out of your own biography. The stigmatized person becomes the neighbor your group taught you to look through. The frightening body becomes the family member aging in front of you. The low-status worker becomes the person whose dignity tests whether your philosophy has reached your nervous system. Now the teaching has teeth. And notice the shift from technique 3. Purity inversion exposed the border inside the practitioner. The fourth pressure pushes that border into social consequence. The first asks what disgust builds inside you. The second asks who pays the price when your disgust becomes hierarchy. That distinction gives the fourth pressure its own job. The false self survives through elevation. It wants an above and a below. It wants a clean side and a dirty side. It wants one group that confirms who you are by giving you somebody else to reject. Non-discrimination drains power from that structure while discernment remains alive. You can protect the body, keep boundaries, leave dangerous situations, and still preserve the human dignity of the person in front of you. That is a grown form of spiritual strength. And it prepares the fifth technique, because social hierarchy is only one layer of identity. The next tradition attacks the social person itself: name, property, family role, biography, and the life everyone around you knows how to recognize. The fifth technique comes from a very different kind of extremity. In some formal Hindu renunciant initiations, the person entering the renunciant life performs funeral rites for himself. Scholarship on renunciation describes the initiate as becoming socially dead. The old social person is ritually finished, while biological life continues. Family identity, property, status, inherited role, and the ordinary biography lose their previous claim on the renouncer. That is technique number 5, ritual social death through renunciation. The difference from contemplating somebody else's corpse is immediate. The pressure turns toward your own social existence. A person spends decades becoming somebody. A surname accumulates history. A career accumulates proof. A family role accumulates duty. The house knows where your chair is. The bank knows your name. Your children know which version of you answers the phone. Your siblings know the childhood version. Co-workers know the competent version. A partner knows the private version. Friends remember earlier selves you barely recognize anymore. All of those relationships are real. They also become mirrors. The false self can weave them into one heavy sentence: "This is who I am, because this is the life attached to my name." Renunciant initiation attacks that sentence with almost frightening clarity. The outer rite belongs to a religious vocation, with its own obligations, qualifications, and consequences. This video stays descriptive. The inner pressure is enough for us. What happens when the biography loses sacred authority? That question gets powerful for an older adult, because a long life creates accumulated identity capital. Maybe you spent 30 years as the provider. Maybe everybody in the family calls you when money gets tight. Maybe your marriage carried the center of your adult identity. Maybe your children needed you every day and now they live in another city. Maybe your profession gave you a title people respected. Maybe your body once let you do work that now requires help. Maybe your parents are gone, and the version of you that existed as their child has lost its living witnesses. Life itself starts removing badges. Retirement can do it. Divorce can do it. Migration can do it. A business failure can do it. Bereavement can do it. Children growing up can do it. Aging can do it. The renunciant rite takes that ordinary truth and makes it ceremonial. The social person has an ending. Physical life continues. The conscious being continues through another chapter. The old name and role lose total authority. That is severe because biography feels personal. In a way, a philosophy lecture rarely reaches. You can say, "I am awareness," and still become disoriented when the company email stops working after retirement. You can say, "I am beyond status," and still feel invisible when people stop asking for your professional opinion. You can say, "Family is love," and still feel your value fall when your children build lives that function beautifully on their own. The body shows where social existence has been mistaken for ontological existence. A calendar empties. The chest feels different. The phone rings less. A title disappears from the signature. Somebody else sits in the office. A younger relative becomes the person everyone asks. That transition can create grief, anger, relief, freedom, jealousy, tenderness, or a strange blankness. The reaction itself becomes evidence about which role had been carrying the word me. This is where renunciation becomes psychologically precise. The old social person does useful work. It holds promises. It remembers debts. It cares for children. It pays bills. It keeps friendships. It develops skill. It builds trust. Spiritual freedom asks for a wider center while those functions remain ethically intact. That distinction is crucial. Abandonment leaves unfinished responsibility in other people's hands. Renunciation, in its mature religious sense, belongs to a disciplined vocation and an ordered transfer of worldly claims. Our inner reading carries the same seriousness. A role can loosen after its obligations have been honored. The provider can discover worth beyond being needed. The parent can love an adult child while giving independence room to breathe. The successful person can lose a title while dignity remains. The wounded person can let an old injury become history instead of permanent citizenship. The spiritual seeker can let a 20-year search become part of the biography rather than the owner of the present. That is ritual, social death translated into ordinary inner work. The body often resists because roles create orientation. A role tells you where to stand, who needs you, what time to wake, what clothes to wear, which problems belong to you, which people call your name. When the role changes, the nervous system can experience freedom as loss of structure. That is why the false self clings to identities that already hurt. A person can hate his job and panic when it ends. He can resent being the family rescuer and feel useless when the rescue role disappears. He can complain about being misunderstood and feel strangely empty when conflict finally disappears. He can carry grief around a marriage for years because the grief keeps the marriage role active inside the body. Identity prefers a painful map over an empty map. Renunciant symbolism attacks that preference. The old map can die. A new relationship to life can begin. Here, the renunciant image connects directly to our view of you as a soul moving through this body. Social death in this context points toward freedom from equating incarnation with biography. The body remains sacred, relationships remain real, consequences remain real, love remains real. The roles become temporary forms through which the conscious being learns, serves, creates, loses, repairs, and evolves. The biography becomes a garment rather than skin. That is a strong false self-break because the personality loves turning history into destiny. I have always been the responsible one. I am the divorced one. I am the successful one. I am the rejected one. I am the caretaker. I am the spiritual one. I am the one everybody abandoned. Those sentences can describe history and still become prisons when the body starts defending them as permanent identity. Ritual renunciation places a symbolic grave behind the old social person and says the next step begins from somewhere wider. And of course, even this can become ego food. The renouncer can become proud of renunciation. The person who gave up status can build status around giving up status. The person who left possessions can become attached to the image of needing very little. The person who left a name can become famous for leaving a name. The person who declares the old self dead can create a new self called the one who died before death. That brings us to the central reversal of the whole video. Now the whole video turns. Forbidden practice can feed the false self faster than ordinary practice when the practitioner falls in love with being forbidden. That is the trap. Ridicule can create the identity of the unbreakable ascetic. Hidden piety can create the identity of the invisible saint. Purity inversion can create the identity of the dangerous practitioner. Non-discrimination can create the identity of the one who thinks he has transcended ordinary social limits. Renunciation can create the identity of the person who has outgrown family, property, title, and biography. The outer content keeps changing while one claimant keeps collecting the trophies. I am the one who went further. That sentence can digest almost any path. This is where secrecy and initiation need a steady hand. Some teachings carry enough symbolic, emotional, sexual, or existential force that preparation becomes part of responsible transmission. Years of ethics, stability, study, relationship, and ordinary accountability can serve as a container around material that would otherwise become fantasy or inflation. The same secrecy can also protect corruption when authority loses accountability, so the test has two directions. A healthy container protects the student while making responsibility clearer. A corrupt container protects the leader while making scrutiny harder. Consent stays real. Ethics stay real. Physical and mental stability stay real. Money stays real. Relationship consequences stay real. A teacher's charisma stays secondary to the life being lived by the student. That distinction gets especially important because the word forbidden attracts wounded hunger. A person who has felt ordinary for years can become intoxicated by the suggestion of an inner circle. A person who has felt ignored can suddenly receive rank. A person ashamed of his history can adopt a sacred identity that feels cleaner than the biography underneath it. A person carrying grief can mistake intensity for proof. The false self loves accelerated importance. The outcome test is more useful. After years around a powerful teaching, does correction get easier? Does truth arrive faster? Does embarrassment pass with less theater? Does private practice reduce the appetite for public spiritual identity? Does power increase responsibility? Does mystery increase humility? Those questions cut through a lot of smoke. The real forbidden territory is the place where personality loses its favorite proof of itself. That prepares technique number 6, because this next system deliberately gives the practitioner a larger, sacred identity and then teaches him to release that identity too. Vajrayana deity yoga gives us a very different kind of identity pressure. Within initiation and lineage instruction, the practitioner can generate an enlightened sacred form, inhabit that form as the practice, and later dissolve the generated form again. Technique number 6 is sacred identity replacement followed by dissolution. The ordinary personality usually treats itself like discovered fact. I am this kind of person. I have this history. I have these limits. This is my face. This is how I react. This is what my family made me. This is what my body means. Years of repetition make the story feel solid. Deity yoga interrupts that solidity by making identity consciously constructed. A sacred form is generated, ordinary appearance loses monopoly. Ordinary speech loses monopoly. Ordinary self-concept loses monopoly. Then the sacred form dissolves too. That final movement keeps the practice sharp. Ordinary identity is generated. Sacred identity is generated. Both depend on appearance, memory, symbol, attention, emotion, posture, and knowing. The practitioner meets identity as something that can be assembled, inhabited, and released. You already see a crude version of this every week. A person walks into work and becomes the executive. He enters his mother's kitchen and becomes the child again. He meets an old school friend and a 20-year-old personality reactivates in 30 seconds. He enters a hospital and becomes the frightened family member. He steps onto a stage and becomes the speaker. He opens a bank app after an unexpected expense and becomes the threatened provider. Different environments pull different selves forward. The body participates, posture changes, voice changes, breathing changes, facial tension changes, vocabulary changes, risk tolerance changes. The social self is already a collection of generated identities held together by continuity of memory. Sacred identity practice makes that construction impossible to ignore. And there is another layer here that adults often understand very quickly. Pain can become identity too. A man can become attached to being the betrayed one. A woman can carry the role of family survivor for 20 years. A student can remain the damaged seeker long after the original crisis has changed shape. A successful person can become trapped inside the image of being strong. A caregiver can feel guilty the moment somebody else starts carrying the load. A spiritual student can keep healing forever because the one who is healing has become the safest identity available. Sacred identity replacement applies pressure to that loyalty. For a period of practice, the damaged biography loses exclusive authority over form. Then even the sacred form dissolves. That is why the divine image has to remain temporary rather than becoming a permanent promotion. Enlightened imagery orients the practitioner toward awakened qualities while ethical equality stays intact. The fruit should move toward compassion, clarity, courage, steadiness, and cleaner responsibility. Spiritual superiority in the grocery store is simply another costume. The initiatory frame carries weight here because the symbolism belongs to a larger web of view, ethics, vows, ritual, and explanation. Pulling one spectacular piece out of that web turns a complete discipline into a slogan. The internet loves the slogan, become the deity, activate the sacred form, enter the hidden identity. The old systems are denser. The sacred form arises, functions, and dissolves. The practitioner learns that an identity can be powerful, meaningful, transformative, and still temporary. Here the lesson meets our channel's language of God and ultimate reality. Godhood, as we use the word here, means the cramped identity loses command to the wider reality already appearing as body, mind, world, and awareness. Personality promotion moves in the opposite direction. So deity yoga carries a strong false self lesson, even for someone who only studies the idea from the outside. Identity feels permanent while being generated continuously. Spiritual practice can change what gets generated. Realization loosens ownership around every generated form. The first 5 techniques attacked the supports around identity: social reputation, hidden holiness, purity identity, status hierarchy, social biography. This 6th technique attacks the assumption that the person has one fixed inner shape. The 7th goes after something even more current: the hunger to possess advanced knowledge and use access itself as proof of rank. Comment which support has the strongest grip in your own life: reputation, purity, biography, status, or spiritual rank. Some living Vajrayana communities still make restricted transmission concrete. Turgar's current Nature of Mind curriculum, for example, keeps parts of its advanced material for students who have already received pointing out instruction from a qualified lineage teacher. The important fact for this video is simple. Access itself can be conditional. Technique number 7 is restricted transmission as a test of collector identity. The false self loves information because information can be possessed. A book can sit on a shelf. A rare term can sit in memory. An initiation can sit inside biography. A secret can become social currency. Access can become rank. The moment a teaching is restricted, several ordinary human forces wake up at once. Scarcity makes the hidden thing feel more valuable. Effort makes the earned thing feel more precious. Group identity makes entry feel like proof of belonging. Comparison makes another person's access feel like evidence about your own level. Curiosity turns the closed door into the loudest object in the building. That whole reaction is spiritual material, and there is a very adult version of this that deserves more attention. You can be 45, 55, 65, accomplished in several parts of life, and still become strangely young the moment a tradition places you back at the beginning. At work, people may come to you for answers. In the family, you may be the stable one. You may have read spiritual books for 30 years. Then you enter a serious lineage, and somebody says, in effect, preparation first. That can sting. The body is suddenly a beginner again. Scarcity adds heat because the closed material appears more valuable. Effort adds heat because every year of preparation makes the future access feel more important. Group boundaries add heat because inside and outside become visible. Prestige adds heat because the mind starts imagining what access will mean about the person who receives it. Sunk effort can add another layer. After enough time, money, study, travel, and emotional investment, the practitioner may start protecting the path because confusion threatens the identity built around all that investment. This is where spiritual consumerism becomes very sophisticated. A beginner buys books. An advanced collector buys rarity. He wants the teaching with prerequisites, the retreat with the smallest room, the teacher available to a very small circle, the term that leaves the whole dinner table confused, the private group, the advanced badge, the last layer. The collector can turn seriousness into luxury. That deserves a hard look because spiritual scarcity can create the same hunger that limited editions create in ordinary markets. The hidden thing begins to glow simply because it is hidden. A serious path reverses that glow. Preparation becomes valuable because of what it builds in the person: patience, ethics, attention, humility, capacity, a stable relationship with discomfort, the ability to receive instruction and live it after the excitement fades. Now the closed door has a different meaning. It becomes less about exclusion and more about whether the vessel has been shaped by the approach to the door. A person hears that an advanced teaching exists behind prerequisites, and suddenly the body leans forward. He wants the name. He wants the PDF. He wants the sentence somebody else received. He wants proof that he belongs inside the deeper circle. The teaching has already started before the content arrives. Can the person meet a closed door and keep worth separate from access? Can he let another practitioner carry knowledge he has yet to receive? Can he complete preparation while treating preparation as part of the path? Can he question a lineage respectfully while preserving his own discernment? Can he receive access later and keep the access from becoming a crown? Those questions attack the spiritual collector. The collector believes accumulation equals transformation. More books, more initiations, more vocabulary, more teachers, more systems, more private groups, more evidence that the path has become advanced. The collection grows while the same body still struggles with correction, envy, resentment, fear, money, family, aging, apology, and ordinary responsibility. Restricted transmission can interrupt that hunger because it places value on readiness rather than possession. A serious container says preparation has weight. Ethics have weight, relationship has weight, capacity has weight. The student's ability to metabolize the teaching has weight. The restricted object loses some of its glamour when access comes with responsibility, and the danger runs in the other direction too. Secrecy can become a shield around authority. Hidden rules can protect manipulation. Prestige can silence questions. Initiatory rank can distort consent. Financial, sexual, or psychological exploitation can hide inside language about surrender. So healthy restriction needs visible fruit. Prerequisites should increase clarity. Authority should remain answerable to ethics. The student should gain discernment rather than dependency. The teacher's status should increase responsibility rather than immunity. That is how secrecy earns spiritual value. The false self prefers a very different arrangement. It wants the secret to prove specialness. It wants the closed door to create enemies. It wants skepticism to become proof that outsiders lack understanding. It wants access to become a permanent class system in the head. That is exactly where don't tell anyone can split in two directions. One direction protects ripening. The other direction manufactures prestige. One reduces display. The other feeds rank. One makes the student more responsible. The other makes the student feel untouchable. The mature test is fruit. After receiving hidden material, does the person become easier to correct? Does the body carry less theatrical self-importance? Does mystery create humility? Does access deepen service? Does the practitioner need fewer people to know what he knows? That is the seventh false self-break. The final support is spiritual possession itself. The person can own reputation, purity, biography, sacred imagery, and then finally own the idea of being initiated. Restricted transmission puts pressure on that ownership before the teaching even opens. And that is why the last technique belongs at the end of this map. The first 6 alter what identity clings to. The 7th exposes the hunger to turn spiritual knowledge itself into property. The word band has one more job before we leave the 7 techniques. It creates desire. A hidden teaching can feel more valuable simply because access is limited. A socially taboo practice can feel deeper because ordinary people recoil from it. A censored idea can feel automatically true because somebody tried to suppress it. Marketing can copy the same psychology and turn ordinary information into a secret level. Those are 4 different situations. The mature viewer separates them. Restriction can create rank hunger. Taboo can create rebellion. Suppression can create obsession. Marketing secrecy can create the fantasy that possession equals transformation. That is why knowledge itself belongs under the same false self-test. A person can memorize every source in this video and turn the whole thing into a collector's shelf. Public ridicule becomes one rare fact. The path of blame becomes another. Tantric purity reversal becomes another. Non-discrimination becomes another. Renunciant social death becomes another. Deity yoga becomes another. Restricted transmission becomes another. The shelf gets fuller while the claimant gets stronger. The useful question is what each path exposes. The first exposes dependence on reputation. The second exposes hunger for visible goodness. The third exposes identity built from purity and disgust. The fourth exposes hierarchy carried through the body. The fifth exposes biography, role, property, and social continuity. The sixth exposes fixed personal identity as generated form. The seventh exposes the urge to turn spiritual access into possession and rank. 7 pressures, 7 supports, 1 false self-learning, 7 different ways to survive. And notice the direction of travel. The first depends on what other people think. The second depends on what other people know about your virtue. The third depends on the categories that keep you clean. The fourth depends on who sits above and below you. The fifth depends on the social life attached to your name. The sixth depends on the shape you believe the person must have. The 7th depends on what you can claim to know, receive, or access. That sequence gives you a usable map. Reputation says, I am what they think. Visible piety says, I am what my goodness proves. Purity says, I am the side of the border called clean. Hierarchy says, I am the position above somebody else. Biography says, I am the life attached to this name. Sacred identity says, I am the elevated form I generated. Spiritual possession says, I am the one with access. That is the ladder. You can watch all 7 in one ordinary week. Monday, a colleague dismisses your idea in a meeting. The drive home becomes an argument with the person who left the meeting 20 minutes ago. Tuesday, you do something generous and feel the tiny disappointment that comes when the act remains invisible. Wednesday, somebody from a class, religion, political world, neighborhood, or lifestyle you distrust walks into your space and your body creates distance before thought catches up. Thursday, a role changes. Your child handles a problem alone. A younger colleague takes the lead. A title you once carried feels farther away. Biography tightens around relevance. Friday, practice goes well and the advanced version of you appears. The body feels a little taller around people who would fail to understand the experience. Saturday, you hear about a restricted teaching and feel curiosity turn into status hunger. The closed door suddenly feels personal. Sunday, the week becomes visible as one pattern. Identity keeps asking the world for proof. Ordinary life already supplies the pressure. The old techniques intensify selected parts of it. That is where years become useful. You have enough history to watch identities mature, fail, return, and change names. Careers end, marriages change form, parenthood changes when children grow, bodies renegotiate strength. Religions inherited in childhood deepen, fracture, or open into direct experience. Grief divides life into before and after. Money can create a version of self that later loss dismantles. Time keeps editing the social person. The old paths accelerated certain collisions. One accelerated loss of social image. One removed spiritual credit. One confronted inherited purity. One confronted hierarchy and stigma. One ritualized the ending of social identity. One generated a sacred form and dissolved it. One placed advanced access behind prerequisites and made the hunger for possession visible. The modern era is copying intensity while skipping formation. A person sees the extreme act and assumes extremity created realization. He sees taboo and forgets initiation. He sees secrecy and forgets responsibility. He sees sacred imagery and forgets dissolution. He sees renunciation and forgets duty. He sees a teacher's unusual behavior and forgets the ethical culture that gives behavior context. Outer intensity makes a great image. Preparation is quieter. That difference creates a spiritual selection bias. The shocking 5% becomes the story. Years of ordinary discipline disappear. A viewer receives the final image and mistakes the image for the path, so this video stays descriptive. Some of these traditions carry physical, psychological, sexual, relational, financial, or legal risk when stripped from context. The value here is the inner pressure each tradition exposes. And there is another reason for restraint. Danger can become stimulation. A person bored with ordinary discipline starts craving stronger symbols, stranger teachers, harsher austerities, more secret material, and bigger identity shocks. Intensity begins to substitute for transformation. Spiritual sensation becomes consumption. Outcome brings the whole subject back to earth. What reaction has less command? What relationship contains more truth? What fear can move through the body while choice stays available? What shame can enter awareness and lose its claim on identity? What desire can be held under wisdom? What social label has lost power over another person's dignity? What spiritual experience has become easier to keep private? What role can change while value remains? What hidden teaching has increased responsibility rather than rank? Those questions put the forbidden material back under examination. Authority comes from fruit, ethics, discernment, and consequence. Age, secrecy, transgression, prestige, and initiation each remain under that test. That is the power test for this whole subject. Two practitioners make the power test obvious. The first has collected unusual initiations, obscure books, fierce imagery, taboo vocabulary, and restricted teachings. Every year, he becomes harder to correct. He needs the room to recognize his level. Esoteric language starts explaining away ordinary harm. Relationships get thinner. Everyday people seem spiritually dull. Concern sounds like ignorance. Disagreement becomes evidence that outsiders lack initiation. The second person carries less spectacle. Embarrassment passes through him faster. He can be wrong in public. A good act can remain anonymous. Disgust can arise while the other person keeps full human dignity. A role can change while value remains. A powerful spiritual experience can stay private. Sacred imagery can deepen humility. Restricted knowledge can increase responsibility. The second person is closer to the fruit these false self-disciplines were trying to produce. That comparison protects you from glamour. The word band has glamour. Secret technique has glamour. A fierce icon has glamour. A hidden lineage has glamour. An initiation few people receive has glamour. Then compare that with the actual inner work, recovering from public embarrassment with grace, admitting envy before envy becomes behavior, serving a stigmatized person with clean boundaries and dignity, releasing the need for credit, letting a career role change while worth stays intact, receiving a powerful practice and becoming easier to correct. Those movements look ordinary from across the room. That is exactly why they are useful. The false self can survive discomfort, silence, austerity, isolation, frightening visions, years of study, a change of religion, a spiritual awakening story, and even a dramatic act of renunciation. It survives through the central plaiment. I suffered, I purified, I awakened, I know, I was initiated, I renounced, I went further, I entered the hidden circle. I became the one who understands. The grammatical subject keeps rebuilding itself. So, breaking the false self means a clean definition. Breaking means loss of dictatorship. The personality remains functional. The name still answers. Family roles still carry responsibilities. The career can still require skill. The body still deserves care. Preferences remain, memory remains, humor remains. The social person keeps doing its work, authority changes, the constructed identity stops behaving like the whole field of existence. You, as the conscious being living through this body, can honor the intelligence that built a temporary self and outgrow its command. That temporary self helped you survive childhood rooms. It learned which face to wear around anger. It learned how achievement earns approval. It learned which family role keeps peace. It learned how money changes safety. It learned how the body receives praise, shame, attraction, illness, rejection, and grief. Some of those adaptations were brilliant at the time. Then, a 30-year-old survival structure can keep ruling a 50-year-old life. Spiritual work becomes useful when the structure gains transparency. Reputation becomes a tool for social life rather than the source of value. Virtue becomes action rather than a badge. Purity becomes discernment rather than social elevation. Status becomes function rather than identity. Biography becomes history rather than destiny. Sacred imagery becomes orientation rather than promotion. Restricted knowledge becomes responsibility rather than rank. That is the actual ladder. And the ladder carries one final paradox. A path can genuinely help you and still become something identity owns. A teacher may have saved a confused period of your life. A practice may have stabilized the body. A doctrine may have given language to an experience that once felt impossible to describe. A community may have protected you during grief. Gratitude can grow around all of that. Ownership can grow there too. Gratitude says, "This carried me." Ownership says, "This proves who I am." Gratitude keeps the gift alive. Ownership turns the gift into a wall. A mature path teaches the difference. That difference becomes especially visible in secrecy. Healthy secrecy protects ripening and reduces display. Corrupt secrecy protects status and blocks accountability. Healthy initiation creates responsibility. Prestige-driven initiation creates a permanent spiritual class system in the head. The deepest value of hidden teaching appears when access eventually becomes less interesting than fruit. The practitioner cares less about who stands inside the circle and more about what the teaching produces in conduct. That takes us back to the path of blame from earlier in the video. After ridicule, purity, hierarchy, renunciation, sacred identity, and restricted transmission, we return to something almost embarrassingly simple, an action whose value survives invisibility. The practice can continue in total anonymity. The audience is gone. Family members are busy with their own lives. The teacher is elsewhere. Followers have their own problems. Rivals have stopped paying attention. The comment section is closed. The practitioner still tells the truth. He still keeps the promise. He still treats the body with respect. He still refuses cruelty when cruelty would raise his status inside a group. He still serves when the service creates a weak story. He still apologizes when an apology costs reputation. That person has begun moving spiritual authority out of the audience. And the false self feeds heavily on weaknesses. Admiration gives it one kind of electricity. Fear gives it another. Enemies provide definition. Followers provide confirmation. A teacher can provide rank. An institution can even provide rebellion when condemnation makes the practitioner feel spiritually dangerous. That is a subtle danger around banned teachings. The sentence, "They are hiding this from you," can electrify ordinary information. The mind invents a hidden enemy. Knowledge becomes proof of rebellion. Skepticism becomes evidence of persecution. Every objection gets absorbed into the same story. A serious mystic keeps reality testable. Sources can be checked. Historical claims can be qualified. Teachers can be questioned. Bodies can send warning signs. Relationships can show consequence. Money can expose pressure. Consent can expose power. A spiritual experience can carry enormous force and still require interpretation. Mystery survives contact with intellectual honesty. That balance deserves protection. The final filter has 3 parts: fruit, dependence, and inflation. Fruit asks what the teaching produces after the peak experience cools. Greater honesty, steadier attention, cleaner relationships, less compulsive self-defense, more capacity to admit error, more care with power, more dignity toward other beings. Those outcomes carry greater weight than a dramatic report. A taboo encounter can feel enormous and leave the old personality untouched the next morning. An initiation can feel enormous and leave apology just as difficult. A sacred vision can feel enormous and leave money, jealousy, anger, and family behavior exactly where they were. Fruit takes time. Dependence asks where authority is moving. A healthy transmission can include teachers, vows, community, discipline, and real hierarchy of skill while the student's discernment grows. A corrupted structure makes the student increasingly helpless, increasingly frightened of questions, increasingly dependent on approval, and increasingly unable to think clearly outside the group. Inflation asks who becomes larger. Every secret that makes the practitioner feel more exceptional thickens the spiritual costume. Every secret that increases humility, responsibility, patience, and awareness of what remains unknown is moving in a cleaner direction. Fruit, dependence, inflation, those three tests belong together. They also show why the deepest false self-work can look unimpressive. A changed relationship to praise may show up as one defensive sentence that stays unspoken. A changed relationship to piety may show up as generosity whose story ends with the receiver. A changed relationship to purity may show up as dignity towards somebody your conditioning trained you to avoid. A changed relationship to social identity may show up when retirement, divorce, aging, or a child's independence changes the role and the person keeps his center. A changed relationship to sacred identity may show up as humility after a powerful experience. A changed relationship to secrecy may show up as an initiated person who feels less need to advertise what happened. That is spiritual evidence in ordinary clothes. Subscribe if you want more source-heavy teachings on restricted traditions handled with this level of discernment. All right, straight back to the teaching. The 7 pressures can now lose their spectacle. A respected man hears laughter and discovers how deeply reputation lives in his chest. A devout woman performs a good act in silence and discovers how much virtue wanted a witness. A tantric practitioner meets an inherited purity border and separates ethical clarity from identity disgust. An Aghor practitioner carries non-discrimination out of extreme imagery and into contact with living suffering. A renunciant rite declares the old social person finished and exposes how much identity depends on name, role, property, and biography. A Vajrayana initiate generates sacred identity and later releases the form that felt divine. A student stands outside a restricted teaching, completes the preparation, receives access in time, and discovers that access itself was another place the ego wanted to crown. That is the sequence. Its value comes from where each pressure lands: reputation pressure, virtue seeking a witness, purity boundaries, social hierarchy, biographical identity, sacred form, spiritual possession. And after enough pressure, something ordinary becomes possible. An older practitioner crosses a crowded market near the end of the morning. His clothes look ordinary. The fruit seller gives him the same impatient glance he gives every customer who takes too long. A child bumps his arm and keeps running. 2 people nearby laugh at their own conversation. The man chooses his fruit. He checks the weight in his hand. He pays the price. He carries the bag himself. The market knows him as another customer. His practice stays private. His old career, family history, mistakes, initiations, losses, insights, and years of study travel quietly inside the biography. The name still answers when called. The personality still has a history. The body still moves through heat, noise, age, memory, and ordinary human contact. The conscious being inside this body has released the demand that history carry the weight of the whole reality.